Hello, and thank you for attending today's webinar discussing factors to consider when planning to purchase respirators from another country, including K95 respirators from China. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. Due to the volume of attendees, your microphones will remain muted. However, if you need to reach out to us, there are two ways you can do so. Please use the chat feature on your screen if you have any Zoom-related technical questions. The Q&A feature can be used to ask questions about the presentations themselves, though please note we will address all questions after the final presentation. Today, a link to today's webinar will be posted on the NIOSH and PBTL website. And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Marianne D'Alessandro, Director of the CDC's National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, National Personal Protective Technology Laboratory.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today in our webinar. Today, we're briefly going to discuss CDC optimization strategies for respirators and discuss the NIOSH and FDA roles concerning international respirators, and hear from some of our stakeholders on some best practices and guidelines from these two user groups. Next slide. CDC recommends a series of strategies to optimize supplies of disposable N95 respirators in healthcare settings when there is limited supply. So to get started today with the issues being observed with international respirators, I first want to remind everyone that before you move to purchasing and using international respirators, it is very important that you make every effort to consider both the conventional and the contingency capacity strategies described in the posted CDC COVID-19 guidance. These strategies include the implementation of effective administrative and engineering controls and the use of NIOSH-approved respirators, including filtering facepiece respirators, elastomeric respirators, and the PAPRs that you see on the left-hand side of the slide. Additional strategies include NIOSH-approved respirators that are beyond the manufacturer's designated shelf life, or extending the use of your respirator. Next slide. Users can be confident that NIOSH-approved respirators will provide the expected level of protection. There are hundreds of NIOSH-approved filtering facepiece respirators in the market, and users can be confident in these products regardless of their country of origin. You can tell if your respirator is NIOSH approved by locating the approval number, which is indicated by the letters TC, followed by 84A for these filtering facepiece respirators, and a series of numbers as you can see in the picture. Since 2008, NIOSH has required the approval number to be placed on the respirator itself or on the straps. It's important to closely inspect your respirator and the packaging, and as designated in the picture on the right, make sure the NIOSH label is identified and that the model number is clear as well. You can be certain that these devices are authentic if you are purchasing directly from a manufacturer or one of the reputable distributors. You should be very cautious about random web searches, though, in eBay, for example. There are some nonprofits out there who have very good intentions but are collecting respirators from donors and distributing them to healthcare organizations who may have respirator shortages. While I applaud these organizations for helping our frontline workers, be sure that you check the authenticity of these products if you have not purchased them yourself from manufacturers or a reputable distributor. If you are unable to ascertain the authenticity of the respirator, you may have to use it as a mask or for source control. So NIOSH has posted information on our counterfeit website that shows pictures of the products we found that are counterfeit. And these products have one or more deficiencies, and sometimes it is difficult to tell if the product is actually counterfeit. So if you go to that website, you can learn more about that information and see those products that to date we have identified as counterfeit. A recent science blog identified here also provides additional information about some of these tips. Next slide. If you are unable to obtain a NIOSH-approved respirator and have no choice but to purchase a respirator conforming to an international standard, we are very clear in the CDC guidelines about which standards are considered nearly equivalent to NIOSH N95 respirators. These include standards from Australia, Brazil, China, Europe, Japan, Korea, and Mexico. The first point to note when it comes to considering the use of these respirators from other countries is the fact that there are NIOSH approval holders or manufacturers of NIOSH approved respirators who also produce respirators conforming to the standards in these other countries and regions. So if you're implementing this crisis strategy and are able to obtain a product from a manufacturer who is a NIOSH approval holder, we have confidence that the respirator will meet the requirements that they claim to meet. The NIOSH certified equipment list you could see at the bottom of this slide can be checked to determine if a manufacturer is a NIOSH approval holder. If the manufacturer is not an approval holder, you should follow several more steps before making a decision to purchase, as will be discussed throughout the rest of this webinar, and you will hear from several other speakers. Many other steps are needed to provide the confidence that you're obtaining a quality product. CDC describes these points in our guidance, and OSHA describes them in the information in their April 3rd enforcement guidance for use of respiratory protection equipment certified under standards of other countries or jurisdictions during the COVID-19 pandemic. And another important factor when considering respirators from other countries is that those respirators have been issued an emergency use authorization by the Food and Drug Administration. If the product is not on the FDA EUA list, it should not be considered for purchase in healthcare organizations until further discussion with FDA takes place and that particular respirator is considered for an EUA. I would like to now turn it over to Dr. Suzanne Schwartz, who is with the Food and Drug Administration. She's the Deputy Director of the Office of Strategic Partnerships and Technology Innovation. Suzanne?
Thank you very much, Marianne. FDA shares with CDC NIOSH an ongoing commitment to address the personal protective needs of healthcare personnel during the COVID-19 pandemic. We continue to keep a strong focus on increasing availability of medical products, along with conducting surveillance of the global supply chain. Because the need for respirators has outpaced supply, FDA is doing everything under its authorities to increase the availability of these devices. And one way that we do this is by issuing emergency use authorizations, or EUAs, for NIOSH-approved respirators, as well as certain non-NIOSH-approved respirators that meet comparable standards that can be used in healthcare settings. Today, we have reissued the EUA for non-NIOSH-approved disposable filtering facepiece respirators made in China. This EUA was initially issued on April 3rd. In the next few minutes, I'm going to summarize the changes to this EUA, our rationale for doing so, and additional public health actions that FDA is taking, working in partnership with NIOSH. We've had concerns about the potential for fraudulent products or products not performing up to the standards necessary for respiratory protection identified on the market as KN95 respirators. And for this reason, we did not originally include respirators manufactured in China in the EUA that we had issued in late March entitled Imported Non-NIOSH Approved Respirators. At the time, we also encouraged importers and distributors to do their own due diligence and take the appropriate steps to verify the product's authenticity prior to importing, particularly those products not authorized by the FDA. However, in response to continued concerns expressed over respirator shortages, supply chain disruptions, and hearing from healthcare facilities who have been seeking access to these products, we issued a separate EUA for non-NIOSH approved respirators manufactured in China on April 3rd. At the same time, recognizing the importance of putting in place additional safeguards. Under the April 3rd EUA, respirators manufactured in China, such as KN95s, would have to have met at least one of three criteria to be authorized. Criteria one is the manufacturer is a NIOSH approval holder, and FDA can verify the NIOSH approval numbers for the manufacturer's other NIOSH approved respirators. Criterion two is that the product has a regulatory authorization under a jurisdiction other than China that can be authenticated and verified by FDA. or criterion 3, that the product was tested by an independent test laboratory accredited to international standards, and the test report demonstrated that applicable performance standards have been met. Working together with NIOSH, we've come to learn that a growing number of respirators listed on FDA's Appendix A that were authorized under this third criterion failed to meet the expected performance standard of greater than 95% particulate filtration efficiency when subjected to NIOSH testing under its modified version of NIOSH's standard test procedure. And this is despite submitting passing test report results to the FDA. In light of these findings, today the FDA has reissued the EUA for non-NIOSH approved respirators manufactured in China, removing criterion 3 of the April 3rd EUA, and thus removing all firms from Appendix A of the EUA that were authorized based on submission of an independent test report. All manufacturers and or importers impacted by this change have been notified. Now, we recognize that many of these respirators may still meet expected performance, but out of an abundance of caution, we are taking this action. Some respirators have already undergone additional NIOSH testing. They've demonstrated that they meet the expected performance standard of 95% filtration efficiency, and they are posted as such on the CDC NIOSH website. In these circumstances, the FDA has added the respirator back to the new Appendix A. Firms that have had their authorization rescinded because they've provided test report documentation, criterion 3 of the April 3rd EUA, but they have as yet not been tested by CDC NIOSH, can consider resubmitting a new request for emergency authorization to FDA within 45 days of the reissuance of today's revised EUA, and after the product has undergone testing by CDC NIOSH and its performance results are posted on the CDC NIOSH website. If the product passes a minimum of 95% filtration efficiency, and there are no other authenticity concerns, the FDA will authorize the product and list it in Appendix A. Additional changes to the reissued EUA include that submissions of new requests for authorization can only be made by manufacturers themselves, and manufacturers should list in their request who their authorized importers are. And finally, criterion 2 of the April 3rd EUA has been changed to reflect the addition of Chinese National Medical Products Association registration certification once it has been authenticated by the FDA. The FDA, in collaboration with CDC NIOSH, is increasing surveillance and sampling of all respirators imported from China to further ensure that products are performing as they should. Respirator shipments from China that come into the U.S. will be subject to random sampling by FDA and testing by CDC NIOSH to determine whether the respirator meets the appropriate filtration standard. Also, the FDA is detaining shipments of products that CDC NIOSH has listed on its website as not meeting their labeled performance standard. The continued surveillance and sampling will, number one, inform the FDA's decision to allow entry of products that meet the performance standard. Number two, refuse products that do not. And number three, identify situations where relabeling the products for use as face masks only, in other words, as source control, is appropriate. Those respirators that fail to consistently meet a 95% filtration efficiency performance standard, as reported on CDC NIOSH's webpage, can no longer be marketed or distributed in the U.S. as respirators. However, again, they may be relabeled as face masks by the manufacturer. We also want to emphasize that if a product fails testing, it will not be allowed to be distributed in the U.S. as a respirator, regardless of whether it is in Appendix A or not. As part of FDA's activities, we've released today a letter to healthcare providers to make these considerations clear for all healthcare facilities that have these respirators in their inventory. We've also posted a frequently asked questions, or FAQs, that walk through the considerations and actions I've discussed today. Next slide, please. This slide includes links to the reissued EUA, the letter to healthcare providers, the FAQs, as well as the FDA 24/7 call center that we have stood up for COVID-19 response. I thank you for your attention, and I will now turn the presentation over to John Powers, who will discuss NIOSH testing.
Thanks, Suzanne. Go ahead and advance to my next slide, please. So I would like to start today by covering some basics for evaluating international products. The first step, as we just heard, is to verify that the product you are considering is listed on the FDA Emergency Use Authorization. When possible, you should ask for samples of the product prior to finalizing the purchase. For legitimate companies, suppliers, distributors, this should not be an issue to receive samples. The results of the international products that NIOSH has been assessing are available on our results page. I will discuss the results page a little bit more on my next slide. NIOSH also recommends that you purchase respirators that have traditional head strap designs. Most of the filtering facepiece respirators being imported have ear loops. It is difficult to achieve a proper fit with ear loops. OSHA regulation 1910.134 requires employers to develop and implement a respiratory protection program when respirators are necessary to protect the health of the employees or whenever respirators are required by the employer. The regulation provides information on the proper selection of respirators, medical evaluations of employees, and training, just to name a few. The regulation also provides guidance on fit test procedures. Appendix A of this regulation contains the fit test procedures, which lays out the 8 exercises that must be performed during the fit test. During the COVID-19 pandemic, OSHA issued a memorandum temporarily suspending the annual fit test requirement as long as the employee continues to use the same model, style, and size respirator that the initial fit test was conducted for. If a different respirator is used by the employee, the initial fit test requirement still exists and should be conducted by the employer. This would include switching from a respirator with head straps to a respirator with ear loops. Preliminary NIOSH assessments indicate that it is difficult to achieve an adequate fit when wearing respirators with ear loops. Several agencies have attempted a fit test with ear loop designs and have anecdotally told us that they could not get a passing fit factor. NIOSH strongly recommends that users do not purchase a respirator with ear loops without first conducting a fit test using multiple people with varied facial structures following the requirements of the approved respirator protection program. Next slide, please. Since the beginning of April, NPPTL has evaluated over 90 international products. Approximately 40% of the products achieved a filtration efficiency more than 95%. This leaves 60% that have filtration efficiency of less than 95%. So I'll elaborate a little bit more now on our results page. The results page is in alphabetical order by manufacturer. The model information is listed along with the international standard and the maximum and minimum filtration efficiency. A copy of the report that was issued is also available. The maximum and minimum filtration numbers on the web page are for the 10 samples that were tested. The reports show the results for all 10 samples and also includes pictures of the packaging and of the respirator that was submitted. I encourage everyone to not just focus on the filtration efficiency numbers, but to really look at the reports. Next slide, please. I would like to end my portion of the presentation by pointing out a couple of ways you can evaluate the respirator manufacturer. Every effort should be made to purchase NIOSH-approved respirators. There are numerous manufacturers that make NIOSH-approved respirators, including several in other countries. These can be found by using the resources available on our website. The NIOSH certified equipment list is searchable using many different terms. For instance, you can select N95, which will return every manufacturer that makes NIOSH-approved N95s. International manufacturers like to include test reports with their products, as we just heard from Suzanne. Every effort should be made to verify the testing laboratory that is shown on these reports. You should check to see if the laboratory is accredited to ISO 17025, which is an internationally recognized standard for calibration and testing labs. In fact, our NPPTL laboratories are accredited to this standard. Another resource to check is the China National Accreditation Service for Conformity Assessment, better known as CNAS. There are several respectable laboratories in China that are CNAS accredited. You can also check the European Union Commission website to find accredited laboratories. While documents are a crucial part of verifying manufacturers, it can be difficult to know which documents are real and which have been fabricated. Documents are very easy to falsify. One final resource I would also like to mention is our NPPTL webpage for counterfeit respirators and misrepresentation of the NIOSH approval. When we receive a notification of potential counterfeit products, we always contact the manufacturer to have them verify and validate the information that we have received. Manufacturers that we have added to this counterfeit page. We always provide pictures to aid users in spotting these products. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Christina Baxter.
Christina, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was talking to myself, guys, on mute. So I wanted to first thank John for passing the baton over to me, and then talk to you guys a little bit about some of the experiences we've been having in the field of the problems with trying to validate some of the masks that are coming in. As you can imagine, there are a lot of different ones coming in for verification, and it's not as simple as what we're used to, which is go to the NIOSH website, look up the mask, and it's there. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll walk you through some of the things that I'm finding for the different types. So this first case is masks that are certified to the European Union standards. And so the standard that we'll be looking for here, you can see in the bottom in that teal block, and that is EN 149, 2001, with the update from 2009. So a couple of the things that you want to look for here, and John brought this up earlier, is first thing we want to do is verify the notifying body. So in Europe, they use what are called notifying bodies that are similar to test laboratories. So if you want to look at it in a US context for respiratory protection, that would really be NIOSH for us. But if we're looking at some of the other PPE, it might be Underwriters Laboratory, it might be Intertech. There's different facilities that we approve for different things. Same thing in the UK and in the rest of Europe. So what you do here, and I always find the best way to find this website is just to go and do a Google search that says European Union, NANDO, N-A-N-D-O. And that is their website for notifying bodies. So then you can go in, and there's multiple different ways to search. You can search just by the name of the entity. So if you have the name of the test lab, just look that up, or the country, or you can look up by its number. So when you see a mask that is marked with a CE mark, it should have a number, 4-digit number right next to it. That is the notifying body's number. And you can just look up that number and it'll tell you whether they are approved to certify against PPE. So some of the things that we see, most of the time I've seen lately is that sometimes that CE mark that we're used to isn't a CE mark at all, and it's actually it's a fake mark called China export. So if you look at the bottom right, you'll see that a CE mark is a trademark that is specific to the European Union. But what it does is the way it's always, no matter how you spread it out, however you change its dimensions, the inside of that C, if you made a perfect circle, would actually hit the outside of the E. If those letters are squished together closer, then you know that it's not the actual trademark from the European Union. And one thing that we want to do is make sure that we look for that CE with 4 numbers after it. That's a common pitfall that people have. If they have a mask and it does not have that on there, then it is not meeting the labeling requirements from the European Union. Things to look for: make sure that notifying body is approved for doing personal protective equipment. So verify the EU type examination certificate, and I'm going to get to this one a little bit more. And then verify that they're on the FDA Exhibit 1, which is for the other types of masks that are not China. That's under Appendix A. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll show you what an examination certificate looks like. So in this case, one of the things that I'm seeing more often than not is something called a certificate of compliance. And everybody seems to be providing these with their masks, but they actually mean nothing. There's no legal authority to a certificate of compliance. So it does not mean that it is an EU type examination certificate. And that is what you're looking for in terms of how do you prove that it's real. So you want to get the EU type examination certificate. You want to be able to go to that agency that did the certification, search for them, make sure that they are a notifying body for the EU Regulation 425, which covers all PPE. And then you go further in and make sure that they can certify for respiratory protection equipment. And the biggest thing I see with all of the European Union products coming in is the fake certificates and the certificate of compliances, which are, while nice to have, mean absolutely nothing. So let's go on to the KN95 experience on the next slide. So in terms of KN95s, John brought this up, but there's a website for the China National Accreditation Service for Conformity Assessment. And if you look up CNAS, just CNAS, you will find this website. The nice thing about the website is I have a picture of it there in the top left. If you focus in, you'll see on the top right, there is a column that helps you find an accredited body. Very similar to the experience you would have with the European Union. It lists all of the people who are accredited to verify PPE for them. And this is where you're going to find a lot of your mistakes, that people are making fake certificates and they're not finding an accredited laboratory. Now, right now, because of so much problem in this area, CNAS has made it really easy for us. So that second red circle you see when you go to the website, that is a direct link where they have packaged up a list of every accredited body in the CNAS network in China that can do any of the PPE assessments. So that list is divided out by respiratory protection, gowns, gloves, goggles. So a section for each one of those things. So it's a fantastic one-stop shop for you to go and look and say, does it pass that first sniff test? So now, one other thing you're going to do is once you find out that you have the mask and you find out the basic information about it, one of the hardest things actually to find is the manufacturer name. So find that, then you're going to go to that FDA Appendix A, which was updated today, as Suzanne told us earlier. And bear with us, all of that was occurring just today, this morning, prior to this call. So we did not have enough time to make any detailed information for you, but you'll be able to find all of that on the FDA website. One thing that I want to remind everybody of too is you'll see certificates saying FDA registration. Now, one thing we want to everybody to remember is that an FDA registration does not mean it's an FDA clearance, and it definitely does not mean that it's allowed for use under this EUA that they have out. So you have to make sure that if it's a KN95 and it is not made by a NIOSH maker, so like 3M, some of the other ones that make products, they don't have a standard FDA clearance, which means they'd show up on the NIOSH website, then they have to be on this Appendix A for us to use. And that just gives us the assurance that NIOSH or and FDA have done their due diligence as well to help us make sure that we're going to have the safety we expect with the product. And one thing that we are seeing left and right are fake certificates. And this is pretty much, when I review these, I would say right now at about 90% no success rate, meaning that at least 90% of the masks that I am asked to evaluate have been fraudulent information. Can't say that that means they don't work, but I can say that it means we can't tell you because we don't have the data. Now, one thing I also want you to remember, there are going to be 3 different markings you're going to look for in the Chinese realm for filtering face piece respirators. The first is the GB 19083-2010. I want you to imagine that to be something like an FDA cleared, NIOSH approved mask. Okay, that one's made for the medical community where if you were to get body fluids splashed at you, it would have resistance to those body fluids. Then you have the GB 2626, which was updated in 2006. That's most common, and that is more of an industrial respirator. May not repel the body fluids. Some of them might. And then you have the GB 2626, the 2019 version, which is just coming online right now. So you'll see some 2006 and some 2019, depending upon when they were tested. So let's go to the next slide. And here I'm going to talk a little bit about the forgery experience. And there's one thing that can help us here, and that is verifying the Chinese business license. And I'm not going to steal the thunder of Luke and Danny coming up because they've done some fabulous work on the validation of the Chinese businesses and things. But the way I do is I go to this website, and the website allows us, it's called the National Enterprise Credit Information Publicity System. And it's a website in China that allows you to look up business licenses. And the couple of things that I like to go through and then look at here is the Chinese company name. So just make sure that the name on your products and the registered address match what you've been given. Okay, look at the incorporation date. If something was incorporated just in 2020, I'm not sure that they've had enough time to build a process that is going to be ISO accredited, like John told you about in terms of the quality assurance. Make sure their registered business scope is in line with what you're looking for. The ones I was just reviewing earlier today, the registered business scope is for a tool manufacturer. And so I'm not sure that they really have the scope or the capability to make respiratory protection. And then a really important thing is look at their registered capital. How much money do they bring through that location, and are they able to front enough money to be able to make and procure the appropriate materials to make the masks? Because you surely don't want to give them all your money up front. So some of the common forgeries that we see is that the company name's not even a registered name in China. The establishment dates don't match. So you see that it's an establishment date might say 1996, but we're in 2020, and they've just gotten their business license. And then a lot of folks will change their capital to make it look like they have the ability to procure the starting materials when in fact maybe they don't. So let's go to the next slide. And this will bring us over to the Australia, New Zealand ones. And I didn't cover all the different types of masks. I just covered the ones I've seen the most. And in this case, it's almost like we're back to our NIOSH experience where we have one-stop shop, we have one place to look, and life is pretty good. In this case, you just go to the Australia, New Zealand standard is 1716. It was updated in 2012, and it's soon going to be replaced by the ISO 16900. But the thing that we can do here is go in and verify the 5-tick standard mark. So where in the US we go and we approve, make sure the NIOSH markings are correct. In this case, we go to this website in Australia, which is SAI Global, and verify the product certification. One thing that we do see a lot is that the product labeling is a problem, but on their requirements, it can be either on the packaging or on the filtering facepiece respirator. And then I'm also seeing quite a few fake certificates coming from there as well. So let's go to the next slide. And what I want to remind you in this final slide is that this is a continuous process. So as we start assessing the issues that we're having, we need to assess that level of risk and make sure that the people that we're procuring the materials for have the risk assessment, which then associates it to an appropriate level of respiratory protection. Then we need to go through and verify that the chosen product is certified to meet that necessary level of protection. If you can't verify it through your standard searches, as well as they're not a NIOSH holder, I would recommend that you then go and see if you can get 10 example products and provide them to NIOSH and have them test them for you. That will give you the level of protection that it's going to provide, and then you can follow that up with a fit test to ensure that you're going to get the protection you need. One thing that we are seeing quite often is that most other countries allow an ear loop design that we don't allow in the US, which tends to not give us as good as a fit, especially if that face design was not made for the average American size face. And then remember, operate following the best practices and keep doing that assessment product as you go. And the one thing that's really important to remember, and I think really comes home when you look at that NIOSH website that is about international masks that they've checked, just because it's a fake mask, meaning it's fraudulent in its markings or it has stolen somebody else's numbers, doesn't necessarily mean it's not protective. But the problem that it does bring up is that we have no idea if it is or if it's not until it's actually been tested. So just keep those things in mind as you move forward. And I'm going to pass this over to Luke and have him start talking about the great work they're doing over at his place.
Hi, my name is Luke Basso. I'm the Chief of Staff of the Indiana Economic Development Corporation here in Indiana. And 7 weeks ago, Governor Holcomb tasked us with buying PPE for the entire state during the COVID crisis. I'll also be joined here in a few minutes by Danny Chan. Danny is a consultant who does a lot of work with Hong Kong and China, who has helped us develop some best practices when it comes to buying respirator masks. Next slide, please. So in Indiana, one thing that we've learned, and I think something we've heard today, buying respirator mask is not an exact science. In fact, you know, it's as you all know, it's a very difficult thing. So we established early some very baseline guiding principles that we would use when searching for respirator mask. The first one being, you know, a bad deal is a bad deal. If you wouldn't have done it prior to COVID-19, why would you do it now? You know, I'm sure like everybody else, we get a lot of pressure to make deals, to put money up front. If you don't buy now, the masks go away. Well, you know, during this time where there's immense amount of pressure to buy, you also have to realize that bad deals are bad deals. In dealing with manufacturers in China or groups in China, you also must be willing to walk away at the last minute. We always tell ourselves the deal isn't done until the document is signed. We've walked away from deals at the very last moment because something has felt off about the deal, and it's turned out to be right. We ask a enormous amount of questions, and then we ask more questions, and they're the same questions. We have a minimum 3 contact rule in Indiana before we can make a deal. We must hear the same answers. They must be right for us, and if they're not, we walk away from the deal. We also speak directly to the manufacturer, and we make sure we're speaking directly to the manufacturer. They have to call us directly from their facility. We do not, or we have to be able to call from them, and they have to verify that their facility is who they are and who they say they are. And something I also wanted to bring up, third-party vendors, or as we call them, third-party scams. There are some people out there that are third-party vendors that are legitimate and helping out, but a majority are not. This is not a world where you can hop in today and go out and buy a lot of masks. In fact, these third-party vendors and third-party scammers are the ones who are really hurting all of us as we go through this. So I can't stress enough today that in order to really defeat this type of scam and these type of people, we have to come together as a group and stop accepting third-party scammers and buying masks from them. I'm sure we've all had these phone calls, we've all had these emails. Again, ask yourself, if they're part of a multi-million-dollar medical organization, why are they emailing you from a Gmail account? If they have access to medical supplies, why won't they put the money up front to buy it themselves, right? It's mostly because they've never done business with this group and they've heard it from somebody else and said, hey, I'm going to try this today. Next slide, please. So on every mask we have, we take samples. So one of our, sorry, I forgot to mention, one of our other guiding principles is we don't buy masks with ear loops. Now, we've dealt with a lot of people who said they'll send us masks that go behind the head, or respirators, excuse me, that go behind the head. But as soon as we get those respirators, we realize that they are over the ears. But so we do not purchase respirators that go over the ears. But we do ask for samples. And if they aren't willing to send the sample, we will not do business with them. And once we have the sample, we do our own fit test. It's partly why we think that we've developed such a great process, because we do the fit test with the smelling salt that makes you cough when it's not a real respirator or real fabric. We let our doctors take a look at the respirators. We have them compare it to stuff they use in the emergency room every day. And then we also evaluate the boxes. But this is becoming harder and harder as the boxes are becoming the next level of the counterfeit world. But you can still see minor differences, and you must be willing to take the time to evaluate all of this. If you don't, you will get caught with some counterfeit mask. I'm now going to turn it over to Danny Chan, who will explain the rest of our process. Next slide, please.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Danny Chan. I've been helping the state of Indiana for about 6 weeks. Previously, I lived in China for over a dozen years, working in private equity, spending a lot of time on due diligence, evaluations of Chinese companies. For the past 6 weeks, I've been spending about 11 p.m. to 5 or 6 in the morning speaking to Chinese manufacturers and Chinese sellers. One of the first things I want to talk about is, as you guys go through this process of dealing with companies in China, it would help to kind of have a philosophical change. So it could feel like whack-a-mole, where you're trying to go through a checklist of 1,000 items, but it's very important to understand philosophically that when you deal with Chinese businesses, that they just have a different set of rules of engagement. So looking at documents, asking for those things, great. All these things are great, but those are more US-centric business practices. From a philosophical standpoint, you need to treat, or I would recommend you treat, every seller from China as a no, and having them work up to get you to say a yes. Because if you go in up front and say, here's the docs, here are the things, that's exactly what they know we look for. So they'll always have what we look for. So you need to spend a little bit of time philosophically going into every deal going, it's a no, and you have to prove to me that it's a yes. And so for Luke and I, buying for the state, we're the first line of defense and very likely the last line of defense. So all the upfront work that you're going to do is going to mean a lot, ensuring that you get the legitimate PPE that you're looking for. And it's conducting a lot of due diligence, making sure your counterparty's going to be correct. Asking for documentation is standard operating procedure. We ask for documents, not that the documents mean a lot, but you do it because you go through that process. You ask for samples. And as you go through this course, Luke touched on these third-party sellers. Some of them are American medical companies, suppliers. They're very aggressive. They're very smart. They use high-pressure sales tactics and sales methods that get you to commit. And all of us helping states and other organizations, we're all doing our best to get the PPE gear, and the sellers know that. So they're using a lot of sales tactics. So you need to be disciplined and kind of filter out that noise to not think about those things. Regardless of these sources, actually I shouldn't say often, but we 100% have to speak to the company. So the manufacturer in China, we will not do anything unless we can speak to them. That's going to help you eliminate some of the sellers, because some of these sellers are buying or sourcing gear as not even the second or third middleman. It could be the fourth or fifth. So they have no access to the actual factory or company, in which case asking to speak to them is going to have a good effect of eliminating some people. Now, for Luke and I, we had an experience with N95 CDC NIOSH seller. And so we asked to speak to the company. The person we spoke to, at the end of it, I asked for a business card. It was a digital business card with no company email, no company phone number. And more than likely, that person didn't work for the company. So having somebody pretend to work for a legitimate company is something that could happen. And so this is, again, why we have a lot of precautions in there to make sure that we're actually talking to the right person at the company that we're talking to. And, you know, as you go through and make these transactions with Chinese companies, know that the repercussions of a bad deal, there's probably not much you can do. And so again, asking a ton of questions, the people are going to say you're being too diligent, you know, don't you trust me? The answer is no, we don't trust you, but you need to earn our trust. So American side, we don't deal like that. But when you deal with the Chinese companies, you have to make them earn your trust. The trust is not built in. And they understand our rules of engagement. I think it's very important as American looking for PPE gear that we need to understand more about China's rules of engagement, the businesses and the companies. As you go through, the first group I want to talk about real quick are the N95 makers. So the CDC NIOSH list, I think those 8 or 9 companies are the gold standard. The difficulty is a lot of people are running around saying they have access to those, and the answer most likely is they don't. And so you have to figure out how to get direct access to speak to the manufacturers. I find it very unlikely and difficult that they will let you or have access to speak to them. So if they cannot, then you shouldn't buy. You should just move on to the next. There are anecdotal evidence of people being able to obtain N95s from China and reselling them, but usually those people are connected in some way to the company, and they're not easy to find, and they're not out there calling people to sell because there's a network of people that know how to get a hold of them. So if they're N95s from China, you just want to be really sure that you can actually talk to the company, because if you don't talk to the company, then you have no idea if it's real or not, and it's going to sound too good to be true. And you just want to be really, really careful about that list. And then shifting gears really quick to the KN95s. Next slide, please. The KNs right now are the wild, wild west. The cost of the fabric that goes into the KN95s to create the respiration, it's gone up from 6,000 RMB a ton to 780,000 RMB a ton. So that's about $52 a pound, up from about 70 cents. So the cost of the actual material has gone up significantly. And so if you get pricing that's way too low, there's something wrong. If you get pricing way too high, doesn't mean that it's real. It just means they're making a lot of money, probably more than they should. But pricing will give you some indication on how real it is, because if the deal's too good, then you know there's a problem because there's a market price for this material. And when you look at the KNs, the most difficult part of the KNs are you could have a mask that passes the permutation test. So if you take the mask, you send it to the CDC, they test it, it's 97%, that's great. The minute you put on your ears, you do a fit test, it doesn't work. So Indiana, we've done these fit tests, and if they're on the ears, you will, or at least the tests that we do, you'll start coughing and you'll start choking off of the fit test. So that's one of the things we do here, and it's important that you guys do that as well. I don't know, as John Powers mentioned earlier, I don't know how you can have an ear-looped legitimate KN95 fabric mask that passes the fit test. And so that's something to be aware of, is that even if the fabric is good with the ear loops, you're more than likely not going to pass the fit test. There's been a couple companies in China that are moving to doing head straps. The problem that I understand is the head straps require different machines from the ear loops, and that those machines are not in high demand. And so people are trying to get them right now because they understand that American buyers are starting to request head loops, which is good. But at the same time, there's going to be a delay from when they can have it. So you just want to be really, really careful that, you know, you're getting things that can pass the fit test, because even if it's good material, if the fit test doesn't pass, then you have to ask yourself, you know, where are these masks going to, and, you know, where is it gonna go? You just have to be really, really careful about that. And then some of the other things that to kind of anecdotally ask is, companies in China, when they change from one industry to another, they have to do a change on their company registration. So there was examples of a few companies that used to sell iPhone phone cords. They switched into making respirator masks about 60 days ago. So you should ask them, provide documentation of your company registration. When did you change? Did you just change to make PPE gear? When did you do that? Have you sold to US companies? Show me companies that you sold to. Give me customs documents that you've actually shipped from China and that landed to the US. Who are some of your American customers? Let me talk to them. And these are things that I would ask the Chinese company as opposed to the middleman, because the middleman more than likely will have every answer that you want. So it's important that you get a hold of the actual seller, because many of these sellers don't think there's any repercussion if they sell bad things to America. So for them, you know, many of these factories in China right now that are switching to PPE gear are having problems in their main business. So they're moving to PPE gear as a means of survival. And if they're trying to survive, they're trying to make a profit, they're probably not going to care about quality control. They're probably not going to care about what any American buyer is going to do to them 6 months or a year from now. So it's very, very important that as you look at these Chinese companies, that you look for ones that have financial strength. And the registered capital system in China is different from the US. You set up a US company, it's par value. You have a company that you create for $1,000 and you raise money or you put up your own money. In China, the system's different on registered capital. What registered capital means shows how big your company is from the beginning. It affects your ability to borrow from the banks. It affects how people view your company. So it's a very good reflection. If you have a company with a small amount of registered capital, let's say $1 million US, and you put in a $2 million order for masks, they're going to need to put up about $1.7, $1.8 million worth of cash to buy the fabric, because the fabric right now you have to pay up front. And this is exactly why they're asking the buyers to front half the money. So they take half the money, go buy fabric or put an order for it, and then they end up getting the other half. So you're basically fronting the entire transaction. But what happens if the price of the fabric goes up, which it has? Are they going to go in their pocket and put up the money that is the difference to get you legitimate masks? Or will they blend legitimate fabric with fabric that's not so legitimate so that your permutation is going to be lower? All these things you have to ask yourself as you go through this process, because if the company you're buying from doesn't have financial strength, then if any change in the price of the fabric goes, you're going to be out of luck and there's not much you're going to be able to do. So it's very important that you look at the counterparty and ask yourself, is this the kind of company that you want to do business with for what you're trying to buy? I think it's very, very important you look at that. And what I first mentioned in the call is philosophically, you have to be very distrusting and have them prove to you that this is somebody you want to work with. We also always ask for the Chinese company's owner's ID and passport. The reason we do that is once they give you the ID and passport, they know that you know who they are. And so it just adds a little bit of a layer of nervousness for them, because right now a lot of the middlemen are insulating the Chinese sellers, going, hey, listen, I'll take care of it, just give me the masks. You need to take the control out of the middleman and deal direct with the Chinese manufacturer. I know that's not easy because you're going to need a Mandarin speaker and somebody who's Mandarin speaking that has done business in China. Just speaking the language is going to be fine, but a lot of these factories, they know that if you have someone on the phone who just speaks Mandarin but does not do business there, they relish that. So I just caution that, you know, you don't want to just get anyone. You want to just, you know, if they speak Mandarin, it's helpful, but just have that mentality of they need to prove to you, the buyer, that they're going to be a legitimate counterparty, or the chances of them being a legitimate counterparty is higher. And this is why we don't do upfront payments. We don't do escrows. We make sure that they have the financial strength to pay for the fabric, and that we're more than happy to pay once we know the product's fine, but we don't front money for people to go do the purchasing of the fabric, because that means they don't have the financial strength, which makes it very, very nervous from a buyer standpoint. And so that's all I have. There's other best practices that we're working on, but it's important when you deal with the KN95s to ask questions, to ask again, to not get pressured into it, and just make sure that, you know, you really think about it and really, really think, you know, is this the company that's going to come through for it? And also the middleman company, you want to make them on the hook. So if the middleman is coming in, you should say, if I buy and something goes wrong, you, the middleman, are financially responsible, as well as the Chinese factory. So you want to see if you can get them into some sort of three-party agreement where all, you know, the other two sides are responsible if something goes wrong. And again, you want to make it so that you're such a hassle that if they're up to no good, that they go, you know what, I'm going to go find another buyer. That's basically the philosophy that you want to have, is you want to have them go, this is too much work, I'd rather go find another sucker. And if you do that, then you get to move on to the next seller, which is hopefully the legitimate one that you're looking for. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you, Danny. So the last slide here is talking about the fact that NIOSH will continue to prioritize the testing that we have been doing according to the scheme that you see on the right-hand side. We will continue to work with FDA. That is the first priority in our testing, because this testing will help the FDA in making decisions and putting information onto the EUAs. It is not the only decision, but it is an input into FDA's decision in making those EUAs. Priority 2 is working with other federal government agencies. As we are seeing these products that are not conforming to the standards they claim to meet, we are providing that information to agencies such as the FBI, the Department of Justice, and U.S. Attorney General's offices, and FEMA and DHS. And those agencies are looking at what actions need to take place next. So we are very involved in with those organizations as well. We will continue to provide this service to state government agencies as well, looking at products that not previously evaluated by NIOSH and those products previously evaluated by NIOSH. And finally, our fourth priority will be to continue to provide FFR users this service as long as that product is listed on an FDA EUA. I want to mention, as John did earlier, that every product that we evaluate is listed on our website, the results in the test report, and the pictures that we do receive from those submitters. Next slide. Here are some additional resources that you can reach out to if you have additional information. All of the FDA EUAs that Suzanne mentioned earlier, and then we have some additional resources as well. Recently, CDC posted the information on factors to consider when selecting an international respirator. A lot of the content of the webinar today is listed on that product that's on the website, and there are some other products as well that you see here. Now I would like to go to the Q&As and reach out to the individual speakers to answer some of the questions we've received online. So the first one I want to go to is looking at Danny or Luke, if you could talk about a little bit more about how you verify you're working with the manufacturer, since it is typical in China that there are other agents and they don't have their own sales force at the factory. How do you know you're working with a manufacturer?
When I ask for the IDs, what I can do is, in some different provinces in China, you can pull their shareholder list from company records, similar to how we have the Secretary of State system. So we grab the shareholder list and then we look at the ID they send and make sure it's the same person. And so that's one way to check. And then when we talk to them, we spend a lot of time talking and letting them understand. And then additional checks we could do is we can call the local government in China and say, this is what we're doing. Can you let me know what this company looks like? And again, this is not easy for most people to do, but it's possible if you have the resources to do that. But the ID coupled with the company registration, that helps. That helps. And then again, it's just asking questions. You know, again, you're being investigative in how you're approaching this. So you don't want to go in there with, okay, I think they're real, let me check. You want to go in there with a mentality that this is not real and you have to prove to me. And again, just by having that attitude, a lot of the sellers just go away because they don't want to deal with it. And so if they're not willing to deal with it, then you're asking yourself, do you want to buy from a company that won't even spend the time to prove that they are who they are?
Thank you, Danny. The next question is for John Powers. John, the question is, what action will NIOSH take to protect NIOSH certified products? If we identify a counterfeit product and we advise NIOSH, NIOSH must take action to stop the sale of these goods.
Oh, as I said before, the first action we take once we get a notification is to contact the manufacturer. So as you can imagine, with the time difference between the US and China, everything's delayed by a day. So we will send the information we have to the manufacturer. We will ask for confirmation. They typically check and get back to us within a day or two. If they tell us that they believe it's counterfeit, then we post it. We also, you know, we have some manufacturers that have sent us a lot of pictures of what the actual product should look like, little nuances of the box, little things to look for. That's the information we've been working with the FBI and Department of Justice and those folks on to try to find these products that are out there and being sold. But if we do find a nonconformance to the NIOSH approval, we will then work with that manufacturer through internal processes that we have that's within the guidelines of our regulation to have that manufacturer correct those issues.
Thanks, John. You can stay off mute because the next two questions are for you as well. Can you explain the private label field in the NIOSH approval?
I will try my best. So, an example of this is going to be a manufacturer that makes their own product. We'll call it product A. And then they're approached by another company and they say, hey, we love product A. Would you make that and put our name on it? So they say, sure. They submit it to NIOSH. We look at it. We issue a concurrence to that private label, and now you have product B. And then that continues. They're approached by another company, and so basically it's a very similar product with different labeling. I kind of think of it as a brand name. You see a lot of so I have a lot of the international products that we get requests for. People say the manufacturer is X, and you look at the pictures and you notice right away that X is a brand name. It is not the manufacturer of that product. So to me, I think it's similar to what you would see as a brand name on the respirator. So hopefully that answered that one.
Yep, okay, thank you. And MIT has recently published results of a test performed on a number of KN95s. Is this a reputable study?
This is a reputable study, and I actually had about an hour phone call with MIT 2 days ago. So they not only have they been performing these tests for the state of Massachusetts, they did tell me that they tested 5 products that we had on our webpage and verified and validated that they got the same results that we got. Which was very good news. We are working with MIT. We are going to try to link from our page to their results once they get something up. They were still working through their university system to figure out the best way to get their results posted. And once they do that, we can link to them, and they've agreed to link back to us. So that'll be another source where people can go and check results for other international products.
Thank you, John. This next question is for John, Christina, Danny, and Luke, and I'll ask you each one at a time to respond. So the question is, are all KN95 respirators ear looped? And I'd ask you all based on what you all have seen in your testing and evaluation. So John first.
So we do see very few. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there are some with head straps. At this time on our results page, it's not easily visible to see that. We've talked about maybe updating our table and putting, head strap or ear loop, but it is in the report. So unfortunately right now you'd have to click through all the reports and see if it says it's an ear strap, a head strap design or an ear loop design. There are only a handful out of the 90 plus that we've done.
Thanks, John. Christina?
I'm seeing the same thing. Very few that are using the head straps, almost everybody using the ear loops. And the fits are just atrocious with most of the ear loop designs. So it's still holding up true that the ear loops are something we're trying to avoid. Thanks.
Thanks, Christina. And Danny or Luke?
The answer is yes. Like from what I've seen, most of the KN95s are ear loops, and it's very, very, very few are head straps. I mentioned a little bit earlier, a lot of the people in China are trying to buy the machines to make the KN95 head straps. It's very difficult to get those machines because the cans, they're just ear loops. So for them to switch, or I think we're going to see a delay. I don't know how long that delay is going to be, but at some point, maybe they're able to get the ear loops on and catch up. But for now, it's a lot of manufacturers that are working on trying to do that. But it's very difficult to get the machines to make the head straps and to make sure they're strong enough so when you put them on, it doesn't pop off.
Thank you, Danny.
Yeah, that was Danny.
Oh, so thank you, Danny.
I agree with the other three.
Okay, thank you. So another question here is, it is not on the FDA list, which is real short now, but NIOSH tested it and it's greater than 95%. Can we use the respirator as long as it fits? This is Marianne. I'll answer that question. So if it's not on the FDA list, it cannot be used in a healthcare environment. However, OSHA does have these products listed in their regulatory memo. So it is possible to use them in other industries. However, OSHA now is just saying if they authorize them to be used in other industries, but as of this time, OSHA is only having their guidance out there for healthcare, is my understanding. Another question here. How do they get away? And then Christina, I don't know if you have any information about this. I'm not sure if someone from the US could answer this, but how do they get away with having a logo that is so identical to the European conformity logo? Can there be legal action taken for masks that are labeled with the fake CE logos?
So this comes into the trademark process. And a trademark is what the CE logo is. And when you submit for a trademark, you actually submit the exact spacing of your letters, the colors, the looks. And what they've done is they've just changed one thing, which is the distance between the C and the E. And that means that it's not a trademark infringement anymore because they have changed that size. They've made it look as close as possible, but in terms of a trademark infringement would be the process they'd have to go after, and there's really nothing they could do there because it's not infringing on their trademark. It's slightly different. In terms of them going after mislabeled products, they can, they will, they have different websites that list all the ones that they find. So as we find them, we try to send emails saying, hey, this is what I found, and they start updating it more and more. And I think they're just doing the best they can at this point in time because reality is it was a non-issue in 2019. It's a huge issue in early 2020. And at this point, everybody's trying to just make sure the right product gets to the right people versus worrying about how do we go after the people with the wrong product. But rest assured, everybody's planning for the future of going after and making sure that this doesn't happen again. Thanks.
Thank you, Christina. This next question is for Suzanne, and it goes along with what I said earlier about the fact that NIOSH testing is one step in your process, but the question is, NIOSH tested Xiangmen respirators and they were 98 to 90% effective, but you said that this will not be on all respirators will be on Appendix A, but it's not on the list. So Suzanne, can you again explain what is going to be on that list and why that one is not on the list?
I can't speak to the particular one that you just mentioned right now, but I'll talk generally in that yes, the testing by NIOSH that is being performed is a critical component of what will be on that list. But in addition to that, for those products and manufacturers / importers that were originally included on that appendix, who came in through that third criterion, as I described, they are immediately withdrawn from the list, and the means by which they would be put back on the list would include, number one, testing, done by NIOSH, as well as the request has to come from the manufacturer. The new request has to come from the manufacturer. The manufacturer would list who their authorized importers are, but we will not be accepting requests from importers. And so there is, and I'm speaking hypothetically here, there is a possibility that the product in question is coming from a source where it was an importer that submitted initially, and as part of this process, we have removed, again, any that were coming from importers.
So Marianne, I can add to that a little bit. The last version of Appendix A prior to today's update was April 24th. Xiongmen was not part of that Appendix A, so it wasn't one of the ones on there to start with. Therefore, it wouldn't transfer to the new one. A lot of the requests we've received, the manufacturers were not on the EUA, and again, maybe a handful have been on the EUA. So a lot of the products that people are buying and using were never part of the original EUA that the FDA posted.
Correct. John, let me add to that as well, now that I have a little bit better framework of what we're talking about here. We were aware of 9 of the entire listing that NIOSH has posted. There were only 9 that actually were on, if you did the crosswalk, on FDA's Appendix A. And it was 7 of those 9 that failed in terms of their performance standards. But as you so correctly stated, given the numbers of products that do appear on your website that have been tested, the vast majority of them haven't even been on the appendix list, which reflects the fact also that manufacturer or previously an importer never came in with a request for that product.
Thank you, Suzanne. We have a question here about Battelle sterilization will only sterilize N95 masks. Do you know if KN95s will be accepted for this process? This is, Suzanne, do you want to answer from an FDA perspective, and then I will answer from a NIOSH perspective?
Yes, that is an important piece that I did not speak to today, but all of the EUAs that FDA has issued for respirators indicate within them that the respirator, if it is authorized, then it is also authorized to undergo decontamination with an authorized FDA decontamination system. If, therefore, a respirator was removed from authorization, it's no longer authorized, as is the case of what occurred today, those respirators, which would include here KN95s, are no longer under the umbrella of considered authorized for decontamination either.
Thanks, Suzanne. And from a NIOSH perspective, those systems that are currently authorized by the FDA are authorized for use in healthcare settings, and then in other workplace settings, it's expected that inhalation exposures may result in loading of the filter and soiling with other contaminants that have not been validated for decontamination. So if these respirators are used in non-healthcare environments and become contaminated with dust in addition to COVID or SARS-CoV-2, we do not know how this will affect the efficiency of the cleaning method or affect any of the performance of the respirator. Also, if it were authorized for use in other workplace settings by OSHA, You have to note that there are several hundred NIOSH certified models and many different models of KN95s as well, and each have their own individual set of construction materials and characteristics. And if you look at these factors, and you have to make sure that all of those factors are considered when determining if you're going to use these processes or not. So NIOSH recommends that you work directly with the manufacturers to determine if their products are able to be used in these various decontamination systems. Okay, so let's see. So I'm going to ask John to answer this question. Does the person who is marketing the NIOSH approval have permission, and this is in the private label again, have permission from the manufacturer holding the NIOSH N95 approval to private label the packaging?
I believe the answer to that is no. They can't just decide on their own that they're going to put a different name on it. It has to come back through our approval program for evaluation. And there's, like I said, there's a process in which we recognize that private label, and then it gets added to the approval. But they should not be able to, so that would be something we would see as potentially counterfeit. If a name shows up on a respirator with a NIOSH approval number, so the NIOSH approval number is the TC-84A-4-digit code, 5-digit code, that would be something that we would post as not being a valid NIOSH approved product.
Okay, thank you, John. And I'll ask all of the speakers this. Are there specific labels required on the KN95s? John, I'll start with you if you have knowledge of that.
In my experience with what I've seen, that answer has to be no.
Okay. And Christina?
The answer is, are they on there? No, but the answer is, are they supposed to be on there? It should say KN95 and either GB2626-2006, GB2626-2019, or I think it's the other one's GB19083, which is the medical mask equivalent for K95. So the FDA cleared, NIOSH approved. So they're supposed to have the standard to which they're certified on the mask. But as John just noted, most of them don't. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And if the model number on the KN95 has the first 3 letters of the manufacturer's name in front of the model number, but on the NIOSH website, it only has the model number, could this be a red flag? And I would say, based on what Christina said, that yes, that would be a red flag. You have anything to add to that, Christina?
I guess I was reading that question. I was a little bit confused because that, just to make sure we're talking about the same thing, NIOSH does not approve KN95 respirators. There are different websites that NIOSH has where we as users can search to say, have they tested that one? And if so, yes, you want to make sure that the markings match exactly, because we have seen several cases where, let's say the product should be JK, but it's certified product for KN95 that's allowable under the FDA Appendix A is JK01. Well, then just a JK won't pass. It's got to be that JK01. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, it's the way they write it. There are always little changes that you have to watch.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was reading that as if it was looking at our test results page, not the NIOSH approved site. And yes,
So,
KN95 would not be on the NIOSH approved site because we do not approve those products.
right.
John,
So
do you
maybe
want to add something?
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit more on that. So when we get these requests, model numbers are very hard to find on the international products that I've seen. So what we do is we look at that box and the packaging as best we can. So a lot of times we'll see it'll say something like it'll say model, and then it'll say KN95 protective mask non-medical. So that's what we use for the model name when we post the results, and that's what we put in the report. Very few of them actually have a numbering system for their models. There are some that do, but very few. So that's why you'll see the model name the way it is on the results page.
Thanks, John. You could stay off mute because this one would be good for you, and maybe Danny and Christina might have something to add as well. So this is about whether or not there's been discussion on how to adapt the KN95s with a clip to pull them behind the user's head. If that is not part of the design, John, do you want to talk about some of the things we've seen?
Sure. So we had this same thought. We actually had one of the products that was sent to us for evaluation. The requester actually put a clip, some sort of 3D printed clip in the package with us, and was asking a bunch of questions about it. So we experimented with an ear loop design. We didn't have one of these clips, but we decided to use a tie strap. So an individual in our lab put it on. We took the ear loops, we took a tie strap. The very first one he put on, the ear loop ripped completely off of the respirator. So we were a little more careful with the second one. Got it on there. He felt that it felt tighter on his face. He started to then go through the exercises of the OSHA fit test. Got to the one where you bend over at the waist, and the whole thing slid off of his face. So we haven't done enough research on those to know for sure how well they work, or if it would be something that could be used.
Thanks, John. Christina, do you have any knowledge about the clips or extenders?
I could see on there, Miss Kim has a comment on there about using the mask extenders for that purpose. And the only thing I worry about is mask extenders are great for when you have that one person who can't get a fit. But when we're doing a quick fit test of several different people to make sure that we can get a product to fit, that just isn't going to do it. If we're already looking at mask extenders just to hit the basic fit testing and checking, I don't think it's going to be a suitable alternative. And what John said about the ear loops, we're seeing products coming in today where the ear loops, half of them are off before they even get here. So please don't pull on the ear loops any more than you have to if you're using those. Thanks.
Thanks, Christina. Danny or Luke, do you want to add anything to that? Have you had any observations with these clips or extenders?
Well, in my experience, when we did the fit test, I think we had 15 or 20 KN95s, and Marion, I think I was telling you it was a smoke test, and so basically we're in a room and we're coughing quite a bit, and you told me that that's not necessarily good for you to inhale, which I wasn't aware of, but from our experience on the fit test with the ear loops, it was tough. Like, it was a lot of coughing for a long time.
Okay, thank you. So one question here we have, is it possible to use an N95 respirator that is certified by NIOSH but not by the FDA? And I'll answer that question. The answer is yes. The FDA clears NIOSH approved device FFRs that also are cleared for protections against fluid resistance and biocompatibility and flammability. But NIOSH, in all other settings outside of healthcare, the NIOSH N95 approval does not have those components to the approval, but is used in other workplace settings. So then another question here, any guidelines or regulation to verify the fabric for any new manufacturer able to check if it can pass a NIOSH test parameters. To my knowledge, we don't have those guidelines. John, do you have anything to add to that question?
No, I mean, manufacturers need to do the tests on their end to ensure that the fabric they're using meets whatever the standard is they're claiming that their product meets.
Okay, thank you. And this next question is for Suzanne. Are the masks removed from the EUA allowed to recondition and meet the recommendations in the enforcement policy?
The respirators that are that have come off the appendix, yes, they could if they're reconditioned and relabeled as face masks.
Okay.
But that's, you know, the caveat there is the critical piece. So they cannot be marketed and distributed as respirators. And this is where FDA, working in the field, working at imports, would be looking at shipments for that and making those kinds of determinations. FDA would work with the manufacturer of record to determine whether that is the direction that the manufacturer wants to go, or whether they, you know, would prefer that you know, that the product not be distributed at all.
Thank you, Suzanne. And the last question is, since the ear-looped KN95 mask are not sealing properly, why are we approving them for use? Isn't this a big issue, especially for healthcare workers? I'll take the time to answer that question. So NIOSH, as mentioned earlier on in the presentations, because of the shortages that we have in the crisis capacity strategy in which we find ourselves, we did identify these various countries as having standards that could have products authorized for use. The standards are good standards if the products do conform to those standards. And if you do have an ear loop design and you obtain a good fit, it is a product that will protect you. And that is the way the NIOSH guidance reads, as well as the OSHA enforcement guidance. OSHA did not, as John mentioned earlier, OSHA did not waive the initial fit testing requirements. That still is a requirement that everyone achieve a proper fit. But the annual fit testing requirement has been waived. What that means is if you have not fit tested with that product to date, then you still have to have initial fit testing with that product because you likely were fit tested with another product prior to this crisis. And I think with that, we have still a number of questions we were unable to answer. We are going to try to determine what the procedure is for answering those and putting those online with the web site with the webinar information. So I thank everyone for participating today. Thanks to all of the speakers, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you very much.